sorry for the minor delay. Today I started my day in Kiev, Ukraine, then in Prague, then I was in Maastricht, Venlo, and I raced to be here with you. I used to live in Amsterdam actually until December, so it's kind of a home game, so I'm very happy to be here. Usually before I start, I always want to test the energy in the room, and I have this simple movement. It's called a high five to the person next to you, and I want to see it. I want to see a bit of enthusiasm, guys. Come on. All right. That's good motivation. Thank you. So I assume everyone is a hardcore blockchain specialist, or are we all beginners? Like, let's raise some hands. Who's a beginner? Oh, I'm very happy. And who's like a hardcore blockchain holder and specialist? Okay. Keep an eye on those people. They hold the bitcoins. Okay. So before I start, I always like to explain a tiny bit who I am and where I come from, just to give you a bit of background story about me. With the super quick internet, of course. We can help it load. Sorry, loading.
That's a good sign.
Sorry?
Have you tried Feathering?
Blockchain. I'm sorry.
Did you put the presentation on the blockchain?
I put it on the blockchain. It's a Bitcoin blockchain. It's super slow. Okay, then I will do it like this, because you can see it just as well. Okay, so usually I always show this collage of my life, which is basically about talking about my favorite topic, blockchain. And by the end of the speech, you'll be brainwashed with the same words. So how I started out, my parents, they always taught me to be really obsessed with the problem and not on the solution. And this meant that I was very curious as a child to always learn about things by deep diving into it instead of being told in school. So I come from a family of hairdressers. This was actually the hairdressing salon like in 1920 in the birthplace of my family. And for 3 generations this business continued, but I decided to go for a different career, as you might see. And I kind of broke the family tradition. I decided to become an entrepreneur, and I really like this definition of what is an entrepreneur. It's someone who jumps off a cliff and builds a plane on the way down. And this actually quite much describes me. And I also found this visualization about this piece of paper that folds itself up to learn to fly. And for me it really symbolizes that whatever you want to achieve in life is always inside of you, and you just have to reconfigure yourself a tiny bit to fly. Yeah, that's my sweet message. Then I found this picture, and this is basically typical for tonight. I heard this quote once that said, every professional once started as an amateur. And so this person, or this kid, drawing the Mona Lisa, had to start out with some drawing just with some pencil strikes. And it's tonight the same for blockchain. You start out as a beginner, but hopefully a couple of years down the line you think, my goodness, it's going to be a super nice future. I'm happy that I started on this journey. So how I started out, here you see me with some nice hair back in the 90s. The height of the internet era, and I saw these pictures of other people behind their computers, and I always motivate myself to keep going for what I'm going, and maybe I end up in the Google results one day as well. So I always build startups. Startups in my definition, they look like this. I always try to attract a lot of different types. So in my case, I work with guys with autism, because they are really focus on certain software tasks and certain software development tasks that they really can shine into, and they deserve an opportunity. So this is a company I built. It's actually in the travel world. I built like the search engines and booking systems for a lot of airlines and booking portals. Just some name dropping with some things, but you gotta promote yourself a bit. This is actually the craziest thing I did. I made software for airlines, and at one point I decided I wanted to start my own airline. Maybe you know it in Amsterdam because it was mentioned last year. I went drastically bankrupt, and this was actually a pretty cool adventure. And I photoshopped this beautiful picture. It was the logo of my company, and I photoshopped it with a landing plane. And then I took out this press release with game over on the screen in the jet, and with the quote, "Don't let the fear of falling keep you from flying." And this is my last sweet message before I go talking about the Bitcoin and the blockchain. In 2012, I came across these guys, and we decided to start actually a so-called exchange. And this is BTC Direct. This was in 2012. And these two guys, they showed up and they started talking about the Bitcoin, and they really triggered me because I'm a tech guy at heart. And they were so passionate about what they discovered that we decided, fuck it, we're going to set up this exchange and we're going to make it accessible for a lot of people to start trading with Bitcoins. And that's basically how it started out for me. Right now I'm also active, some of you visited it last week, in the south of the Netherlands, where we have 4 big innovation campuses, of which one is fully focused on blockchain, artificial intelligence, to tackle climate change. So it's a pretty interesting environment, and that's what I actually work on. And I invite all of you guys, if you ever are in Limburg or dedicatedly drive there, to visit us and to see what we're doing there. So we just had a dedicated blockchain incubator where we had 10 blockchain startups from all over the world come there, and during 8 weeks we pushed them to validate their business case. Yeah, some statistics for the people that like it. Anyway, the Bitcoin. So how did it start out for me? When I met these guys, I started preaching about the Bitcoin, and it was actually kind of taboo in the beginning. Like everything on the internet, it was a gray area, and it was only used for things that I shall not mention, to be polite, but all kinds of illegal things on the internet, just like how the internet in the beginning was used for certain things. So when I talked, it looked like this. It was a pretty empty room. It was not like this impressive filled room of people that are really passionate about it, but it was a bit empty. But this Bitcoin did something really, really special. It started to accumulate value in a way that other coins were not actually doing. So for example, if you look at the euro and the dollar in comparison to each other, every year they only increase or decrease a tiny bit in relation to each other. But this Bitcoin was doing something pretty special. It started accumulating a lot of value. And that meant, because we're all financially wired, that the meetings when I talked about this thing became more filled because people saw the gold. So this gold rush kind of started, and people started paying attention and got busier and busier. Right now this PowerPoint is outdated. I don't know if any of you knows the price right now and wants to shout it out loud.
6,000. No, that's $6,000.
That's, And now you gotta look who's smiling in the room, because those were the people that were. Anyway, and throughout the years, for people to get used to the Bitcoin, I always asked them every time they paid for a drink or something else, I asked them, hey, can I pay you back in Bitcoin? And actually, like you see how old this is, one friend of mine, he paid for a hotel room for 70 euros in January 2015. And I paid him back in Bitcoin. And I think if you look at the screen now, like this hotel night, it will be like 2,000 euros plus. And I think 5 years down the line, I will make the joke that this is the most expensive hotel room that I ever stayed in, and I will regret that night. Anyway, I don't give investment advice, but actually in regards to the whole cryptocurrency boom, I think we're just at the beginning. And that has to do with the fact that if you go out into the streets, I think the average person is really not that much into it, and it's still way too technical. And there's still a high entry barrier, and I think the people here in the room, you're still at the beginning of this revolution. So I think I feel pretty comfortable with saying this, that in 2025 this will go way beyond this point. And there's a special reason for this. I also hear a lot of people that they will get Bitcoins as soon as it drops. It's always a temporary drop, so get on board while you can. Anyway, it has to do with the system behind the Bitcoin. That's actually pretty crazy. Because our traditional money, like the euro, it's based on inflation, which basically means that the government, every time that they need to finance it, they can put on the printer and they can print new money, which devaluates the money that is in circulation. And these cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, they actually have a reverse model. They have a deflationary model. They have a fixed amount of coins that are in circulation. And the more demand there is in the market, the more it will drive the price up. And that's actually what's happening right now. So I think with the 5,000 or 6,000 that it is right now, it's proven pretty much that it's becoming way more valuable than things like gold or other assets that we always looked up to. Because it's about scarcity, and these coins become scarcer and scarcer and scarcer. Of course, they also came up with something to keep it still practical, because these coins can be divided into, I don't know, like a billionth of a Bitcoin, so to say. So in the future, we'll still be able to pay for things, but don't be surprised if selling a house in the future, it might be like 2 Bitcoin instead of thousands of Bitcoins. So the blockchain revolution, I like to call it a revolution because it changes a lot of things in society. I always like these visualizations. I don't know if anyone is a big fan of Anonymous or these things. But I think we're going to move towards a fully blockchain-based society, and it's going to challenge a lot of the existing infrastructure and big corporations that we have in society, such as banks or pension funds or all kinds of other institutions. And they will get challenged with smaller niche propositions from smaller players created by developers or by small groups like us that do something maybe way better for a small group than a big organization can do for us all. So I think like in the Netherlands right now we have a small amount of banks, for example. I think in the near future you might have 50,000 small banks that target like a small group of people with a way better proposition than one big bank. And also, yeah, this homeless person, this is so-called blockchain address. I think maybe in the near future you're better off if you're on the street to beg for Bitcoin than to ask for euros. I like suns, and when the internet came, it was like the sun rising. Like it was good, but the blockchain sun, I think it's actually like way bigger than what the internet did for the world. So I just want to put this in perspective before I start continuing. So before I start going to examples of how the blockchain works, I always have like a small masterclass of 10 terms that you need to understand to talk blockchain. Yeah. And it's basically like this Dilbert quote. I don't know if any of you guys know it, but there are a lot of people now talking about blockchain who really don't understand it. But it sounds really interesting, and if you add blockchain to your LinkedIn description, you will get a lot of invites and requests. Anyway, so we're going to go do this in like a mini classroom. So the first term is the so-called ledger. Is anyone familiar with this term so far? Oh, that's impressive. Okay, so the ledger is actually, I always compare it to a big Excel sheet that we share with the entire world. And this Excel sheet has a couple of special properties. Because if you compare it, for example, to a bank account right now, all our bank accounts are hidden from each other. And that basically means that if I transfer you 100 euros, I cannot see what you do with that money, and you cannot see where I got that money. But in the blockchain space, we share like this universal bank account that holds all the transactions of everybody on the planet. And therefore, you can start seeing things in relation to each other. So if I go to a shop, I'm able to see where the shop bought its products. And if you give me money, you can see if I spend it on beer or on wine or whatever. And this creates a totally new paradigm, so to say, in society, that things become transparent and things are more and more pushing towards the impact that you make with the money instead of just paying for something once. Also, the Excel sheet has another special property. It's an Excel sheet where you can only add things to. You can never change things once they're stored on the blockchain. It's like a one-way street. And that basically means that if it's stored in it, you can trust, so to say, that the data is correct. And they came up with all kinds of fancy algorithms to do that. The second term is decentralization. I always ask people to confess if they downloaded some illegal MP3s back in the days. Yeah. Okay. Look away. Yeah. Okay. Very good. And if you remember, there was something special about this platform that provided these illegal MP3s. And that it was not run by a company on a central server, but that it was actually run by computers of people at home. People like you and me just hosting this entire network of illegal MP3s and sharing this. And that was actually a pretty big revolution back in the day. And this is pretty similar to how the blockchain now works. Like all this data that is stored in these transactions, it's not stored at one company or one organization, but it's stored on all these computers of the people that contribute to the network. Individuals that do this. Then you have the term, yes?
If you have a salary and you get it in Bitcoin,
yeah.
and I know your hash,
yes.
Then I can see exactly how much you earn, or is it something that, because you saw also the balances between, or?
Yes, there's something special, so the question is, if you get paid out your salary in Bitcoin, will people be able to see it? In the blockchain space, you're not limited to just one bank account. You can have as many bank accounts, so to say, as you want on the blockchain. And all these bank accounts, they are not listed with your first and last name, but they have like an anonymized address. And that basically means that for the transactions that you want to be visible in relation to each other, you can group them into one account, and you can group other things into other accounts. I will come with some examples later on for this. Yeah? So the blockchain, where does this term come from? That is, every time that you want to do a transaction on the blockchain, you basically send out to the network, hey, I transfer this 100 coins from me to you, and it gets put in a waiting queue, so to say. And in this waiting queue, all computers that host this network, they start validating that this transaction is a valid transaction. And what they basically do is they group all the transactions of the past 10 minutes together, and they connect them with a unique puzzle piece to the 10 minutes of transactions before them. And therefore, all these transactions are basically locked in time, that if you would change something, all these puzzle pieces would not fit anymore. And that basically brings a safety for the blockchain. I don't know who's a tech person in the room? Okay. You're all familiar with cryptography or public and private keys. What this basically comes down to is that every time that you want to do a transaction, you always have a so-called private key, which you can create a signature that you are the valid person doing this transaction. And then you have like a mirrored thing where you can validate the transaction, and this is called the public key. And everyone can see everyone's public key, so to say. So every time that I put a signature under a transaction, other people are able to validate that I'm the valid person doing this transaction. I tried to simplify it a bit, but I can get back to that later. Another very important thing is the so-called wallet. Keep in mind the metaphor of a bank account. Right now, your money is basically stored at a bank, and that basically means that the bank can freeze your assets. It can do all kinds of things depending on your activity. I see someone giggling, but it depends. I went bankrupt, it happened to me, true story. But what's totally different in the blockchain space is that every individual becomes again like the holder and the responsible person for their own money. And this is actually a revolution, because this means that nobody can take away something that is yours. I also have one of these things. It's a so-called hardware wallet, where basically you store your bitcoins or your other coins or whatever on this thing, and that if I want to do a transaction to another human being, there is no bank or central institution in between, and it's directly peer-to-peer. This also means that a lot of people that do this for the first time, they lose this thing, or they lose their PIN code, and then they call me really troubled. They say, Vince, you gotta help me out. I bought some bitcoins 2 years ago, and I cannot access it anymore, I cannot find it anymore. And then I hang up the phone, because it's not possible to recover. And this is actually something that triggers like this mindset shift that we need to have, that it's our responsibility to hold the money. It's not anymore the responsibility of a different organization or whatever. And it's not just, yeah?
Is it normal to have more wallets than one? Just one?
You have one wallet basically, or you can have as many of these things around your neck as you like, feel free. But on one wallet you can hold multiple public-private keys, so to say, and within one of these keys you can store as many transactions as you want. I would recommend a backup, definitely. But yeah, the big thing is that it's not just about doing financial transactions on the blockchain, but that we're also going to see a shift where all kinds of other data may be stored and accessed through this thing. So I could imagine that in the near future, if you go to the hospital or to a doctor, that also your medical data and the consent to show this medical data to a medical professional will be managed by these kind of wallets. And you basically plug it in and you say, hey, look at my medical file, and you take it back when you walk out. And therefore you start seeing a shift that it's not so much anymore that all your data is stored at all these companies or organizations, but it's stored with you. And it's also going to challenge therefore a lot of business models, like for example Google is free because they store all this data about you and they build this nice advertising profile. This will get challenged with the blockchain. So another term that you're going to hear a lot is the so-called smart contract. And I would actually like to change that term a bit, because I like to more describe it like a smart transaction. And it basically comes down to that if I transfer, for example, 100 euros to you right now, I can only transfer the value, so to say, and I can write a nice description here, buy some wine or some beers with this money, but I cannot do anything with it. But on the blockchain you can do something special because you can attach software to this transaction, and I can thereby start limiting in things that this transaction can do. So for example, I can, as a government, I can say here are some subsidies for, I don't know, taking care of something, and you can only spend it with these parties, and you can only do that within this time frame, and if you don't, the money flows back automatically to my account. And thereby all these transactions, they start shifting from movement of value towards the triggering of, how do you say it, something that needs to be fulfilled. Yeah, like a promise. And actually, like the other party can needs to take certain actions to claim this value, so to say.
Contract.
Yeah, exactly. Contract. Exactly. Touche. Another term is the decentralized app. Yeah. We all now have apps on our phones, but on the blockchain you will have apps on the blockchain. And what's actually pretty cool about that is that these apps will also have their own mini bank account, and they can start doing transactions with other pieces of software, or for example with devices. And this is going to create like a totally new dynamic of how we do transactions, because now a lot of the transactions that we do, it's either a human making a payment or an organization, and it's going to shift way more to software doing transactions automatically and towards devices doing transactions automatically. Another term is forking. I don't know if you ever heard about this in software development.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Forking is actually something that also happens in the blockchain space continuously. What this basically means is that you can have multiple versions of something, and that, for example, now if we take this room, if this is a traditional organization and half of the room disagrees with the other, then we need to have a tough meeting and we need to decide, okay, as a leader I would then say like, okay, this is now what we all need to act upon. In the blockchain space this is actually something different, because every time that we don't agree, we can basically divide the group and say, hey, we want to continue with this reality, and the other group says we want to continue with this reality. And this is basically what happened, for example, with Bitcoin. It split up. And therefore you had Bitcoins with different properties because part of the group didn't agree with the other group. And this will happen way more in the future, and this is going to create a bit of a crazy atmosphere, because from the same coin you will have multiple versions, and in the end they will start behaving differently. Then another term is mining. I don't know if you saw these things. If you see this at some young cousin's bedroom, probably he's a millionaire. This is the so-called revolution of mining. And what mining actually is if you think back of this Excel sheet, that every time you want to add a transaction, it needs to be validated. These devices are actually doing that validation constantly. And to do this, they use computing power, and this costs energy. And therefore there's a real financial cost, so to say, to validate these transactions. So it really costs a lot of money if you want to, for example, fraud the system and say, hey, I transferred this money secretly or whatever. It really costs money to compete with all the other computers that are burning energy to prove this. And if you then think again about these puzzle pieces that get connected to each other in a unique way, the first person that makes a fitting puzzle piece, so to say, gets rewarded with newly released coins. And at this moment, for example, with Bitcoin, it's 12.5, I think. So this basically means 12.5 times 5,000. It means that you can stop working for that year. But yeah, a lot of people, they are competing for this, but it's yeah, there's a whole algorithm behind it. I will maybe deep dive a bit into it later, but I don't think it's relevant now. And then another thing is the token. And you might know this from a nightclub or from a special event where they basically issue their own currency, so to say, just for the event. And this is what you're going to see way more in the future, is that every organization or every commodity will start having its own so-called token or coin. And right now, of course, we do all our transactions with euros, but I can imagine in the near future that you might have an Amsterdam coin, and you might have an I coin, you might have a beer coin, and all these things popping up that have special properties, so that if you want to pay somewhere for a certain service, you need that specific coin to access that service. And basically they stole this concept from the Americans, who say if you want to sell oil, you need to have the dollar. So a lot of startups, they start becoming smart, and they see that that's a big advantage. So like I said, startups are paying attention to this as well, because they think, this is actually a pretty nice way to raise some capital for my startup. If I just issue my own coin and sell it to the big audience, I don't need to go to a bank anymore, I don't need to go to all these traditional things, and that's pretty much escalating right now. So to give you a bit of sense right now, certain startups that issue their own coin, they're raising amounts of upwards of 200 million. And they probably don't even have a Chamber of Commerce registration or a traditional bank account. But they have 200 million in coins and a dream. And this bubble is going to burst. So I think if there's one bubble, so to say, in the whole blockchain space, it's the fact that a lot of people that are not qualified are able to raise huge amounts of capital and enter into things that they have no place to be in. It's also an interesting time. So if you want to do this yourself, good luck. It might be that the US government will pick you up with a helicopter and lock you up soon. Anyway, so right now I want to reward you with your diploma of the 10 terms of blockchain, so that I can go towards some examples of the impact that this will have on society. Everybody feels comfortable? Yeah? Okay. So like I said before, why is this really important? This is because right now our economy is mostly based on humans and organizations doing transactions, but actually everything around us is becoming like this computer. Your car is basically a writing computer, your phone is basically a computer, probably these lights are connected to something, this beamer and so on. And actually all these things, they're now all based on that the owner of these assets needs to pay for the energy bill, needs to pay for the fuel for the car and all these things. But we're going to move towards a space where all these assets will have their own bank account, so to say, on the blockchain. So your phone will have its own bank account, your car will have its own bank account. And if you then need to fuel your car, instead of just walking in to pay for the fuel, your car will start paying for it yourself. And therefore the blockchain will become like this universal transaction system, so to say, to start facilitating this trust between all these devices, people, and all kinds of other cool stuff, and start creating this new economy. Another big thing is that right now if you want to do a transaction, you need to create this invoice and you need to put in some manual labor, so to say, and therefore we don't invoice small amounts. Like say for example, every time I open this door, maybe this door will be opened 200,000 times before it breaks, so to say. And it would cost too much effort to send you all invoices every time you open the door. But on the blockchain, it's a wasteful thing in the future. It's still not there, but it will be. And it becomes very easy to do super small transactions for things that we don't think are worth registering right now, because it's too much effort. But in the blockchain space, it will become something we register. Like I said before, I think we're going to move towards a point where we're also going to step away from this whole mindset of individual ownership of all these assets by an individual or by an organization. And all these assets will basically become like independent units, so to say. And they will start interacting with us, and that means that we can start using all these vehicles and real estate and all these things around us in a way more efficient way, instead of being stuck in this old ownership model where there's one owner or one renter or user or whatever.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
Do you mind if I ask questions or not?
Feel free.
Yeah, I just want to know that. So you mentioned just the slide before that my car will pay if I tank gas or I need to read the maintenance. But it means that you need to have one blockchain.
Yes.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah. Yeah.
Wait,
What was the
there are
question?
questions, maybe I bring them
Yeah,
back.
Okay.
What was the question?
So the question is there one blockchain, or will there be multiple blockchains for all kinds of things?
One,
Yeah.
like, as you explained, there should be one
Yeah.
blockchain or one coin.
Yeah.
Or am I wrong?
Actually, there are, of course, at this moment, I don't know the exact number, but hundreds of blockchains right now in existence. However, if you compare it, for example, to the internet, I think we're still in this infrastructure building stage, and you will start having these exchanges between blockchains so that you can do things across multiple blockchains. So you might have a blockchain just for vehicles, and you might have a blockchain for coffee and whatever, and these things will start being able to transact with each other. Okay.
Should I collect some questions, or do you want to?
Some questions, but yeah, one or two at a time. Sure.
How are you going?
Hello.
Thanks for the explanation. I think the issue is that you keep saying the blockchain, and that's pretty confusing for
Yeah.
people.
Okay.
You should refer to it just as a Bitcoin blockchain or a particular of coins blockchain.
Sure.
The blockchain in terms of is the underlying system behind Bitcoin. It was derived through Bitcoin, and now it's attached to multiple other currencies. Over 800 exist. So that might just clear things up for people because safety refers to
valid point. Yeah.
The same with smart contracts as well. It's not the smart contract. There's multiple ones as well.
Thank you for. Okay. No, it's a very valid point. I think also in the future, because a lot of people that want to develop things, they don't feel comfortable with existing technology, they will always come up with their own versions that improve on existing infrastructure. But to keep it simple, I just try to generalize it a bit. But a very valid point. I think right now, for example, for smart contracts, it's really pushed forward on Ethereum. If you look at IoT devices, you have IOTA and all kinds of other things. But maybe we'll deep dive a bit into these examples later on. Okay. Like I said before, I'm just going to use the blockchain once more, but just to bully a bit. But right now, if you look at your bank account, you only use it to transfer value constantly. And I think this is going to shift towards transacting all kinds of other things that we're going to store in this bank account, so to say, or in this wallet. So for example, now if you do a like on Facebook, it represents no value except maybe a statistic in this video that Facebook generates every 3 months about your friendship. But in the near future, all these likes, they will also start becoming like, what's saldo in English? Saldo? Balance, yes, sorry. They will also start representing balances that you can start doing transactions with. Maybe the price of beer will be different here if you liked a lot of social media posts that happened here in the near future. So keep on pushing the like button as much as you can, because it will be the value maybe of the future. Another thing is that we're going to also use our bank account to report, for example, that we saw a document in a certain way, and we start, how do you say it, registering that someone saw a specific document or a specific picture in a certain point in time. And it will become like the proof that it is like that. Feel free to enter.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Good evening.
Sorry.
So I think in the near future you will start accumulating all kinds of balances in your bank account. So also, for example, the locations that you're at, or all kinds of other data that Google is now tracking, you will start tracking, so to say, in your bank account on the blockchain. Because it will start accumulating into different values. Say, for example, you want to vote for something in the municipality in the near future. Maybe the municipality will ask, so, okay, who are the people that are the most in this park? And they might have a higher influence on what happens to the park than people that never visit the park. And all these things will start becoming to have value. Then we have a thing about how we run organizations. I don't know if you guys heard about the DAO. The Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And this basically means that right now all our organizations, they have like this management layer at the top that basically runs it. And within the blockchain space, they actually came up with a model where they say, okay, say for example, we want to start a venture capital firm together. We just put this piece of software on the blockchain, and then everyone puts in money with this thing. And then every time that we want to make an investment, what, 5 minutes? 50 minutes. Oh, yeah. Okay, then I'll skip over some things.
Oh.
The thing is that we need to give networking time slot. Sabine gave up 5 over minutes to him.
I got five credited here.
This is how
I'll put it on the box. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Okay.
your decision doesn't count.
I will skip over some things, but I think this is a very important one. Like, as you know, I come from the airline industry, and in the airline industry you have this thing from dynamic pricing. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but if you book a flight 6 months in advance, it's €6, and if you book it 3 hours in advance, it costs, I don't know, 6,000 exactly. And I think this is going to happen with a lot of things in society, that basically the price for something will start shifting from being determined by the supply side, like the ticket for a seat, but it will become more and more about all these context points, for example, like the timing when you buy it, what your loyalty is, I don't know, in which region you live, all these kind of things, they will start playing a role in determining the price for something. So I think in the near future you will not be able to walk into a supermarket and see static prices of things. Because maybe because you buy this tomato every week, you have a different price for the tomato than someone that buys a tomato for the first time. Yeah.
So on what time frame do you see something like this becoming reality?
We're experimenting with these things already, but I will deep dive a bit after the other speeches, I think, otherwise I will take too much time. I just want to give a couple of quick examples before my time ends. But it's going to happen quick. Anyway, so like what I said before is that this blockchain also creates the opportunity to have like, I call this a mutual connected business model. That is, if you look at a supply chain, right now it's, if you have 20 steps in the supply chain, I cannot look back before the person where I purchased my things. But in the blockchain I am able to actually see, like for example with the sweater, exactly like which factory it came from, and I can see like the full details of how this product came to be. So all the products that we buy, they will become way more about the whole story of how they're created, where they're from, and what people were involved in the process of creating it, instead of the actual end result of that process. Like I said before, because we move into this smart contract space instead of the space where we just pay for things, I believe that in the near future, a lot of the things will become about fulfillment. So for example, if I book this holiday and I see these nice pictures on the booking website, I would now pay €1,000, for example. But in the near future, you will say, hey, if I have this view, you get 30% of the 1,000. If the beach is like this and this woman is also there, then you get the other 70%. If not, the money comes back. And therefore, you will start seeing a shift that is all about fulfillment. You also have certain hotels right now that basically start looking that if you visit them, they say, okay, you have 5,000 Facebook followers. Maybe it's more value to me that you post something about my hotel than if I would pay a marketing employee, for example, €100 to reach that same audience. It might cost me way more. And that's what the blockchain is going to facilitate, to constantly give these values. Yes.
Did you see the Black Mirror episode about this?
Yes, and I get this question every time.
Was it a funny view?
Yeah, exactly. I recommend watching it. Okay, just 2-3 more examples and questions I will do later. One thing is that if you look at all these supply chains through the blockchain, we will also start seeing different value indicators on how we choose which products to buy. So for example, if you look at this sweater, if through the blockchain I'm able to see the whole transport footprint, for example, of how the sweater came here from Asia to through the port of this, and it was stored in this warehouse and so on. Maybe instead of just seeing a price tag, I will also see this product cost 2,400 kilometers of transportation, or this product cost this amount of man hours. So all kinds of other value indicators that I as a consumer can base my decision on. Boom, boom. I always like to visualize it with this, because this is the harsh reality. Everything that is cheap, the price is paid for by other people that we're not seeing. And that's what the blockchain will start making visible. Okay, one more example. It's about the concept of qualified buyers. If you're an artist, like right now, if an artist comes to town, they say, hey, I want to play in the Amsterdam Arena, or the Johan Cruijff Stadium, or what's it called now. And they say, this is the price of the tickets, and it's fixed. But in the blockchain space in the future, for example, every time you play a track on Spotify or on YouTube, it might get registered on the blockchain. And then the next time that an artist would come to town, he would say, hey, everyone that listened to my music as soon as it came out and that listened to my songs on repeat, they can come for free. Everyone that listened to it after 2 weeks, they pay €50, and everyone else pays the full ticket price. And therefore you will start seeing this concept of qualified buyers, where you start putting in putting this intention out there for people to build up loyalty and all kinds of other things. I think my time is quickly going up. One more crazy example, and then I will finish my speech. This is an example that we're building right now at Brightlands. We're actually giving a tree a bank account, several trees. And what we're doing is, like right now, you have a lot of people that want to contribute, for example, to the nature in their area. But what we did is we stored the GPS coordinate of these trees, and the people that contribute €10 to the landscape every year, we basically allow them to install an app, and that every time that they walk past specific trees, it gets recorded which trees they walk past. And they start doing this microtransaction from this €10 divided specifically to the trees that they walk past by. And then we add something special to that, because all these trees, since they all have their own bank account, they also get a piece of software that if there is enough money in this bank account, they can start paying someone to plant the next tree close to it. And thereby you will start having this dynamic thing where nature becomes programmable thanks to the blockchain. That's my quick last example. I will tell about this at the drinks. And then this guy, do you remember him? Yeah. This is basically all the people that say, we still have plenty of time to think about the blockchain. No, you don't. It's happening right now. Pay attention to it. And I'm happy that you're here. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. 1, 2 questions maybe? Do we pick them or? Sure. No? Yeah? Okay. It'd be hard to choose. I think it was fast.
Yes. I just got a message on my laptop that the hard disk space was running out. And the hard disk space on my laptop was running out. And then I saw that there was 143 gigabytes of ledger occupying the hard disk. So how about the scalability of the blockchain technology?
Yeah, this has to do with the maturity of the technology, so to say. So they had to choose what they spend their development time on. So right now, what basically happens is that everyone in the network needs to have a full copy of this ledger. And this is of course impractical, because the more transactions that will happen, it will not become feasible that one computer can basically store all these things. So in software development, you have a thing called sharding, which basically means that parts of the data gets distributed amongst different groups of computers that have copies of the same things. And this combined will basically create like an infinitely scalable hard disk that we can all contribute to. And I hope in the near future, like the storage will move away from this very dedicated hardware towards our phones and all kinds of other devices that we have around us, instead of being dependent upon like really dedicated hardware. Yeah, I see someone shaking their head strongly.
So, hi. You can prune the blockchain, whoever asked that. So there's a way to prune the blockchain. Also, you don't need to download the whole blockchain if you just want to transact as a wallet. The only reason you would want to download the whole blockchain is if you want to run a node. So there's no real necessary, it's not necessary.
As a consumer, it's not necessary.
Correct, correct. There is a privacy oriented reason to download the whole blockchain to run your own node, but a consumer would not find that useful.
Last question.
Last question, people.
Maybe something to add only. The current state of the blockchain is really not scalable at all. We have really low transactions, and this is the main thing where Vitalik, for example, is working on right now. One thing is, for example, the RAID network, which makes it much more scalable. So we will see scalability of those things like in the next 2 years, definitely.
Exactly. Yeah. So the fact that it's not right now doesn't mean that you shouldn't go into this space, because these things will get fixed. So feel comfortable that a lot of good engineers are looking at it and tackling it. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Presentation. Really appreciate it. I think it was very good kickstart of a BlockchainTalks first edition. Now the floor is Sabine David. She's marketing. So in the meantime, you can introduce yourself.
That was on my side.